The mistake that changed everything. James Carter sat at the far end of the colony's food hall, quietly eating his meal. The human settlement on the planet Vashera 3 was small, but it had attracted many alien travelers. Among them were the Vasheri, the native species of the planet. Tall, slender, with deep violet skin and glowing silver eyes, they looked almost ethereal. James never had much interaction with them. He was just an engineer sent here to maintain colony systems. He didn't care for politics or alien customs. He just wanted to eat his food in peace. But that peace was soon broken. At the entrance of the food hall, a young Vasheri woman stood, looking weak and exhausted. Her clothes were torn, and she was clearly starving. Her silver eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything, to eat. No one offered her help. Other Vasheri looked away, and the humans ignored her. It wasn't their problem. James frowned. Was no one going to help her? He sighed, grabbed his extra food pack, and walked over. The alien girl's eyes widened as he approached. Up close, she looked even worse. Her cheeks were hollow, and her body trembled from hunger. "Here," James said, offering the food. "Eat." The girl stared at the meal in his hands. Her eyes flickered with shock, then confusion, then something James couldn't understand. She didn't move. "It's okay," James said, trying to sound reassuring. "You need food, right? Take it." Slowly, with shaking hands, she accepted the meal. She opened the package and took a small, careful bite. Then another, then another. Soon, she was devouring the food like she hadn't eaten in days. James smiled, relieved. At least now she wouldn't starve. But as he turned to leave, he felt something grab his wrist. The girl was holding onto him, her silver eyes locked onto his. Tears welled up in them, but there was something else there too, something serious, something intense. You have chosen me," she whispered. James blinked. "Huh." The food hall, which had been buzzing with quiet conversations, fell completely silent. Every Vasheri in the room was staring at James now. Some looked shocked, others horrified. A few even whispered among themselves, their expressions full of disbelief. James frowned, uncomfortable under their stares. What the hell was going on? "Wait, what do you mean, chosen?" he asked, looking back at the girl. She swallowed hard and took a deep breath. You gave me food. In my culture, that means you have asked for my hand." James' brain stopped working for a second. "Excuse me?" The girl straightened her posture, as if preparing for something important. "Sharing food is a sacred bond for my people. It is the way a Vasheri proposes marriage." James' stomach dropped. Oh no. He looked around at the watching aliens. Some of them were nodding in approval, others whispering about how unexpected this was. This wasn't a joke. They actually believed he had just proposed to this girl. James let out a nervous laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. Okay, hold on. This is a misunderstanding. I was just helping you out. That's all." The girl's expression changed instantly. She flinched as if he had just slapped her. You wish to take back your vow?" she asked, her voice trembling. James opened his mouth, ready to say yes, but before he could, a deep, powerful voice boomed through the room. "Who has claimed my daughter?" James turned to see a towering Vasheri warrior step into the food hall. He was much larger than the others, his dark armor gleaming under the artificial lights. His piercing silver eyes locked onto James. The girl, who James now realized was named Lirava, stood up, her head held high. "This human has given me food, Father. He has chosen me." James wanted to die. Right there, right on the spot. The warrior studied James for a long moment. Then, to James' horror, he smiled. "Then he will prove himself worthy." "What?" The warrior turned to the other Vasheri and declared, "A bond has been made. The human will face the trial of a husband." The room erupted into cheers and whispers. Some aliens clapped, others gasped, but all of them looked completely convinced that James was now engaged. James, meanwhile, just stood there, his food completely forgotten. What the hell had he just done? You can't just undo a sacred bond. James Carter's heart pounded in his chest. The cheering aliens, the towering Vashari warrior, and the intense silver eyes of Lirava, the girl he had unknowingly proposed to. This had to be a nightmare. But no. He could feel the heat of the food hall lights on his skin. He could hear the deep, rumbling voices of the aliens discussing his so-called bond. He could feel the tight grip of Lirava on his wrist, as if she refused to let him escape. This was real. James swallowed hard. Listen. There's been a mistake. The Vashari warrior, who Lirava had called her father, stepped closer. His imposing figure loomed over James, making him feel small despite being one of the taller humans in the colony. His voice was deep, smooth, but carried an edge of authority that made it clear he wasn't someone to argue with. Human, the warrior said, I am Varzun, warlord of the Vashari. You have honored my daughter with your offering. This is a moment of great joy. Joy? James felt like he was about to pass out. He looked around, hoping, praying, that some human official would step in and explain the misunderstanding. But no one did. Most of the humans in the room looked just as confused as he was. Others, some were recording the moment on their communicators. Oh, great. This was probably already going viral. James let out a nervous chuckle. Look, sir, Varzun, right? I think there's been some kind of cultural mix-up. I was just trying to help your daughter because she looked hungry. That's it. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Lirava's grip on his wrist tightened. Her expression changed. The soft gratitude in her eyes was replaced with something more intense. Hurt, panic, fear. You wish to take back your gift? She asked, her voice trembling. James hesitated. He wasn't a bad guy. He didn't want to hurt her feelings, but at the same time, he wasn't ready to be an alien's husband. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Varzun's deep voice cut through the room like a blade. You would shame my daughter in front of our people. James blinked. Excuse me. Varzun's silver eyes hardened. The bond of food sharing is sacred. It is a vow older than our written history. To offer food and take it back is the greatest dishonor. James' stomach twisted. What was he supposed to do? Lirava, still clutching his wrist, looked desperate now. If you break the bond, she whispered, I will be marked as shamed. No one will ever accept me. My father's honor will be tarnished. James stared at her. This wasn't just some silly mix-up. This was serious. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. If he rejected the bond now, Lirava wouldn't just be embarrassed. She would be outcasted from her own people. James ran a frustrated hand through his hair. He didn't sign up for this. He was a Dan engineer, not some warrior or diplomat. But if he said the wrong thing now, he could ruin this girl's life. Lirava's father watched him closely, waiting for an answer. The entire food hall had gone silent. James took a deep breath. I don't want to shame her. The tension in the room lessened slightly, but James wasn't finished. But I can't just accept something like this without understanding it first. Varzun's eyes narrowed. You wish to understand our ways before claiming your place at her side. James nodded quickly. Yes, exactly. That's what I meant. For a long moment, the warlord just stared at him. The weight of his gaze was enough to make James sweat. Then, finally, Varzun chuckled. Very well, human. He crossed his arms. Then you will undertake the trial of a husband. James felt his heart skip a beat. The what now? Lirava's grip on his wrist relaxed slightly, but she still held on to him. Her face was a mix of relief and nervousness. The trial of a husband, Varzun repeated. If you wish to truly understand our ways before fully accepting the bond, then you must prove yourself worthy. The trials will test your strength, intelligence, and honor. If you succeed, you will be accepted as Lirva's true mate. James wanted to scream. He was an engineer. He fixed colony equipment. He wasn't a warrior, or a strategist, or a survivalist. He tried one last time. And if I fail? Varzun's expression darkened. Then the bond is broken. But so is your standing among my people. You will be seen as weak, a dishonorable man. You will lose all respect from the Vasheri. James gulped. Lose respect? Fine. He wasn't looking to impress aliens. But the way Lirva looked at him, the way her hands trembled slightly on his wrist, he realized something. If he failed, she would take the shame with him. The humans and aliens watching held their breath, waiting for James' answer. James exhaled slowly. Okay, I'll do it. Varzun smiled. Then the first trial begins tomorrow. James had never regretted a meal more in his entire life. The trial of a husband. James Carter stood in the middle of a vast circular arena, the golden light of Vashera III's twin suns casting long shadows over the red sand beneath his boots. The air was thick with tension as hundreds of Vasheri warriors, nobles, and common citizens gathered around to watch. Their silver eyes gleamed with anticipation. This was it, the first trial. James still couldn't believe he was doing this. Less than 24 hours ago, he had been a simple engineer, minding his own business in the human colony. Now, he was forced to prove himself in an alien tradition he barely understood, all because he had given food to a starving girl. And that girl, Lirva, stood at the edge of the arena, her face filled with hope and worry. You don't have to do this, she had whispered to him earlier. There is still time to walk away. But walking away would mean disgracing her in front of her people, and despite the absurdity of the situation, James couldn't bring himself to ruin her life like that. So here he was. The towering figure of Varzun, Lirva's father, stood on a raised platform, his deep voice echoing across the arena. The first trial is a test of courage. The human will face the Khazar. A massive gate creaked open on the other side of the arena. James's stomach dropped as a deep, guttural roar shook the ground. Oh, hell no. From the darkness, a beast emerged, an 8-foot-tall predator with thick, armored scales, glowing red eyes, and 4 razor-sharp claws on each limb. Its mouth dripped with venom, and the spikes along its back flared as it sniffed the air, searching for prey. James was the prey. The Vasheri cheered and chanted, eager to see the fight begin. But James wasn't a warrior. He didn't have weapons. What was he supposed to do? Punch the thing? He turned to Varzun, raising a hand. Wait, shouldn't I get, like, a sword or something? Varzun's expression remained neutral. A true mate of a Vasheri does not rely on weapons alone. He must prove his cunning, his instincts, survive the beast, and you will have passed. James groaned. Great, just great. The Khazar snorted, fixing its blood-red eyes on James. Then, with terrifying speed, it charged. James barely had time to dive out of the way as the beast's massive claws tore through the sand, kicking up dust. He scrambled to his feet, his mind racing. Think. He wasn't a fighter, but he was an engineer. He knew how to solve problems. The Khazar was fast, strong, but was it smart? James scanned the arena, searching for something, anything, he could use to his advantage. His eyes landed on the towering stone pillars surrounding the battle zone. Perfect. He bolted toward the nearest pillar, his heart hammering as the beast let out an ear-splitting screech and chased after him. Come on, big guy. Right this way. The crowd gasped, murmuring in confusion. Why was the human running? Was he afraid? Lirva's hands clenched into fists. No, he's not running. He's thinking. The Khazar lunged, fangs snapping, claws swiping. But James dodged at the last second, making the creature slam full force into the pillar. The impact sent cracks running through the stone, and the beast staggered, momentarily dazed. James grinned. Oh yeah, that worked. But he wasn't done. He sprinted to the next pillar, forcing the beast to chase him again. It fell for the trick a second time, this time hitting even harder. The audience's murmurs turned into surprised gasps. This wasn't how a warrior fought, but the human was outsmarting the beast. Varzun stroked his chin, watching closely. James kept moving. Each time the Khazur charged, he led it to another pillar, weakening it bit by bit. By the fifth impact, the once ferocious predator stumbled, struggling to stay on its feet. James took a deep breath, sweat dripping down his face. Okay, time to finish this. Instead of running to another pillar, he stood his ground. The Khazur snarled, shaking its head before letting out an enraged roar. It charged one last time, desperate to end the fight. James waited until the last possible second. Then, at the very last moment, he dove to the side. The beast, unable to stop, slammed full force into the largest pillar. This time, the stone collapsed. A huge chunk of the pillar fell onto the Khazur's back, pinning it to the ground. Silence. Then, the crowd erupted into cheers. James stayed on the ground for a second, catching his breath. He won. Varzun stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. The human has passed the trial of courage. More cheers. Some Vashari warriors even stomped their feet in approval. James turned his head, searching for Lurva. She was still standing at the arena's edge, her silver eyes wide, her lips slightly parted. She was impressed. James sat up and let out a breathless laugh. Okay, that wasn't so bad. Then, before he could fully relax, Varzun's voice boomed again. The next trial begins at sunrise. James groaned, flopping onto his back. He was going to die. Other aliens want him too. James Carter barely had time to rest before the next challenge loomed over him. His body ached from exhaustion, his muscles sore from running, dodging, and nearly getting eaten by an 8-foot-tall predator. But he had done it. He had passed the first trial. Now he was standing in the middle of a Vashari ceremonial chamber, surrounded by alien nobles, warriors, and scholars. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense, the dim blue glow of bioluminescent crystals casting strange shadows on the towering walls. Lurva stood beside him, her expression a mix of relief and nervousness. "You did well," she whispered. "Many thought you would run." James gave her a tired look. "Trust me, I thought about it." Before she could respond, a deep gong echoed through the chamber. The voices around them hushed. Varzun, Lurva's father, stepped forward. His golden armor gleamed under the lights as he raised a hand. The human has passed the first trial. But strength alone is not enough. A mate must also prove wisdom, adaptability, and honor. James barely held back a groan. "Oh great, here we go again." Varzun gestured toward an elderly Vashari female, her violet skin marked with ancient golden tattoos. She carried a ceremonial staff, her silver eyes gleaming with intelligence. The second trial begins. The trial of diplomacy. James frowned. Diplomacy. Before he could ask what that meant, the chamber doors swung open. A group of alien dignitaries strode in, but they weren't Vashari. Their skin was dark blue, their elongated heads crowned with bone ridges. Their clothing was more elaborate than the Vashari's, decorated with woven metallic threads that shimmered as they moved. James recognized them immediately. The Craxians. Unlike the Vashari, the Craxians were known for their strict, warlike society. They believed in strength above all else. Unlike humans, they despised weakness. And, unfortunately, they didn't particularly like humans. James swallowed hard. Oh, this is gonna be bad. One of the Craxian leaders, a tall female with piercing yellow eyes, stepped forward. She studied James like a predator sizing up its prey. "This is the human," she said, her voice sharp like a knife. This soft thing. James blinked. Excuse me. Varzun didn't react, but Lirva stepped closer to James, her body subtly positioned between him and the Craxian leader. Be careful what you say, she warned. He is not weak. The Craxian leader tilted her head, an amused smirk playing at her lips. He defeated Khazur. Impressive. But I wonder if he is worthy of only one mate. James frowned. What? The Craxian leader's gaze locked onto him. I have daughters of my own. Perhaps the human would like a Craxian mate as well. James froze. Wait. What? The room erupted in murmurs. Some Fasheri warriors looked offended, while others exchanged interested glances. Lirva's entire posture stiffened. Her fingers curled into fists. James had no idea what was happening. Hold on. I didn't. The Craxian woman stepped closer, invading his personal space. Her yellow eyes glowed with amusement. You have proven your worth to the Vashari. But what about the Craxians? She smirked. Do you truly believe one mate is enough for you? James' brain short-circuited. Lirva growled lowly, stepping in front of him. He is mine. Silence. Then laughter. The Craxian leader grinned, her sharp teeth flashing. Ah, now this is interesting. James looked around, completely lost. Okay, someone explain. What's happening? Varzun finally spoke. In many of our cultures, a strong mate is often desired by multiple clans. If one proves their worth, others may wish to claim them as well. James felt his stomach drop. So you're telling me I'm being recruited? Varzun gave him a rare, amused glance. In a way. Lirva, meanwhile, looked furious. Her usually composed demeanor was slipping. He is bonded to me. You cannot claim him, she snapped. The Craxian leader smirked. Oh, I was not aware that humans followed such rigid traditions. James needed to fix this fast. He turned to Varzun. Okay, what exactly do I need to do to pass this trial? The warlord nodded. You must handle this situation with honor. How you respond will determine your worth as a mate. James took a deep breath. He turned to the Craxian leader, straightening his posture. I appreciate the offer, he said carefully, but I cannot accept. The Craxian leader arched an eyebrow. Why? James glanced at Lirva, whose silver eyes burned with intensity. Then back at the Craxian leader. Because I have already made a choice, and I don't take my promises lightly. Silence. Then the Craxian leader laughed. A human with honor. Fascinating. She crossed her arms. Very well. I will not interfere. James let out a breath of relief. Varzun nodded. The human has passed the second trial. The Vasheri cheered. And Lirva, who had been tense this entire time, finally exhaled. James, however, was still trying to process what just happened. This is the weirdest week of my life. The war that changed everything. James Carter barely had time to celebrate passing the second trial before everything fell apart. He was back in the human colony, trying to process his insane new reality. He had accidentally married an alien, proven himself in a trial of combat, then somehow diplomatically avoided getting another alien wife. He thought things might finally calm down. He was wrong. It started with the alarms. James was inside one of the colony's engineering bays, running maintenance on the settlement's power grid when the first explosions hit. The walls shook violently, sending tools and equipment clattering to the ground. The overhead lights flickered. Emergency sirens wailed across the settlement. James grabbed the edge of a workbench, steadying himself. What the hell? Then, his comms earpiece crackled to life. All personnel, this is Commander Reynolds. The colony is under attack. Repeat, we are under attack. James' stomach dropped. Attacked. By who? He sprinted outside. The sky above was lit up with streaks of plasma fire, bright red beams ripping through the atmosphere as enemy warships descended. And then, He saw them. The Zarkari. James had heard of them before. A nomadic, warlike alien race, known for raiding settlements and leaving nothing but destruction behind. Their ships were sleek and black, like predators in the night. Their warriors, clad in heavy exoskeleton armor, carried energy weapons capable of tearing through steel. And now, they were here. Humans and Vasheri warriors rushed through the colony streets, trying to organize a defense. But it was chaos. Civilians screamed, buildings collapsed under enemy fire, and the human security forces were completely outnumbered. James ducked behind a cargo crate as an explosion sent shockwaves through the ground. His hand shook as he pulled up his comms. "Lurva, where are you?" Her voice came through, frantic but alive. "James, the Zarkari are everywhere. We're trying to hold them back at the south wall. My father." Her words cut off as another explosion drowned her out. James didn't think. He ran. The battlefield. James arrived at the colony's outer perimeter, where the fighting was the thickest. The Vasheri warriors, Lurva's people, fought fiercely, their energy spears crackling as they clashed with Zarkari raiders. The human soldiers, armed with plasma rifles, were holding their ground as best as they could. But it wasn't enough. The Zarkari were too many. James spotted Lurva, her violet skin streaked with dirt and sweat, fighting alongside her father, Varzun. She moved with deadly precision, her blade slicing through the air, deflecting enemy fire. James' breath caught. She was incredible. But then, his eyes widened. A Zarkari sniper, perched high on the cliffs above, was aiming straight at her. James didn't think. He grabbed the nearest discarded plasma rifle, adjusted his aim, and fired. The energy shot hit true, striking the sniper directly in the chest. The alien collapsed, his weapon clattering uselessly. Lurva turned just in time to see James standing in the middle of the battlefield, rifle in hand, breathing hard. Her eyes widened. "James?" He didn't have time to respond, because at that moment, the Zarkari forces shifted their attack. They weren't just raiding anymore. They were targeting James, a human threat. James ducked as plasma fire rained down around him, barely missing his head. Why were they suddenly focusing on him? He didn't have to wonder for long. A massive Zarkari commander, taller than the rest, stepped forward from the enemy ranks. His armor was heavier, his weapons more advanced. His glowing red eyes locked onto James with deadly intent. "There he is," the commander growled. "The human they call, the chosen mate." James froze. "Wait, what?" The commander continued. "The Vasheri see him as something special. If we take him, their morale will break." James felt his blood run cold. He was a target. Not because he was a soldier, not because he was a warrior, but because of his bond with Lurva. The Zarkari had learned about the trials, about the human who had won the respect of the Vasheri. And now, they'd wanted to use him as leverage. James barely had time to react before the commander raised his weapon. A surge of energy blasted toward him. And then, Lurva tackled him to the ground. The explosion erupted behind them, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. James gasped for air, looking up into Lurva's silver eyes, filled with desperation. "You need to get out of here," she shouted. James shook his head. Not happening. The battle raged around them, but in that moment, James made a decision. He wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to be just a spectator. He turned to Varzun, who was fighting nearby. "I need a weapon." The warlord barely hesitated. With a sharp nod, he tossed James a Vasheri energy blade, the hilt glowing as it activated in his hands. James tightened his grip. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a warrior. But he was human. And if the Zarkari wanted a fight, he was going to give them one. The turning point. The battle that followed would later be remembered as the moment everything changed. James fought alongside the Vasheri, using his human instincts and strategic thinking to outmaneuver the enemy. He called out tactics, set up ambush points, and used human engineering knowledge to sabotage Zarkari war machines. The Vasheri warriors, inspired by his courage, fought even harder. And then, Lurva and James, fighting side by side, finally took down the Zarkari commander. With their leader dead, the enemy forces panicked and retreated. The colony was saved. And James was no longer just a human engineer. He was a warrior, a leader, a mate. The war had changed everything. And now, there was no going back. The ultimate decision. The battlefield was still smoking when James Carter stood at the edge of the Vasheri camp, staring into the horizon. The air was thick with the scent of burnt metal and plasma residue, the ground still littered with the wreckage of the Zarkari attack. But they had won. The Vasheri, alongside the human colonists, had defended their home. The Zarkari forces had retreated, their warships disappearing into the sky. The settlement still stood, battered but unbroken. And yet James couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. He wasn't just an engineer anymore. He wasn't just some human caught up in an alien misunderstanding. He had become something more, a hero or a problem. James walked through the recovery camps, where wounded warriors and civilians were being treated. Vasheri medics moved swiftly, their glowing hands pressing over injuries, their healing techniques far beyond anything human medicine had developed. Everywhere he went, people stared at him. Some whispered his name. Others nodded in respect. And some looked at him with fear. He wasn't just some outsider anymore. He had fought beside them, led them, saved them. But with that came a new problem. He was changing things. He saw it in the way the Vasheri nobles debated in hushed tones, glancing at him from across the campfires. He heard it in the way human officials from the colony spoke his name with caution. James Carter, the engineer, had become James Carter, the legendary outsider. And not everyone liked that. Lurva's truth. Lurva found him just before sunset, standing by the river that ran along the camp's edge. The sky above was a deep purple, the twin suns setting in the distance, casting long golden shadows across the landscape. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood beside him, watching the water, the soft glow of bioluminescent plants reflecting in her silver eyes. Finally, she spoke. "They fear you." James sighed. "Yeah, I noticed." Lurva turned to him, her expression unreadable. "It is not just the humans. My own people. They do not know what to do with you." James let out a dry laugh. "Great, so I'm a problem for both sides." She didn't deny it, and that told him everything. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Lurva stepped closer. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. "Saving me?" James turned to face her fully. He didn't hesitate. Never. A flicker of something crossed her face. Relief, maybe even hope. But it was gone in an instant. "Then you must make a choice." James frowned. "What choice?" She hesitated, as if trying to find the right words. "You cannot live between two worlds forever, James." His breath caught. She was right. The humans saw him as a complication, someone who had upset the balance of diplomacy. The Vasheri saw him as a legend, but legends were dangerous. They could shift power, break old traditions. He could either return to the human colony, back to his old life, or he could stay. Stay with Lurva. Stay among the Vasheri. Become one of them. But if he chose to stay, there would be no going back. A tense meeting. The next morning, James was summoned to a council gathering, one that included both Vasheri leaders and human officials from the colony. The tension was thick in the air. Varzun sat at the head of the table, his powerful frame unmoving, his golden armor gleaming under the torchlight. Across from him, Colonel Reynolds, the highest-ranking human officer in the colony, had his arms crossed. James already knew where this was going. Colonel Reynolds sighed. James, we need to talk about your situation. James leaned back. You mean the fact that half the colony thinks I'm some kind of warrior hero, and the other half thinks I'm a political disaster waiting to happen? Reynolds didn't smile. Something like that. Varzun spoke, his deep voice cutting through the tension. He is Vasheri now. He has proven himself. Reynolds bristled at that. He's a human. One of ours. Here we go. James sighed, rubbing his temples. So what's the plan? Do you expect me to just walk away? Pretend none of this happened. Reynolds folded his arms. We're offering you a way out, James. A transport back to Earth. No more trials. No more fighting. Just your old life back. His old life. Back to Earth. Back to fixing colony machinery. Back to being just another nameless worker. James felt Lurva's eyes on him from across the room. She didn't say anything. She was giving him the choice. No pressure. No demands. Just waiting. Varzun spoke again. And if he stays? Reynolds' face darkened. Then he is no longer under human protection. James' stomach twisted. He understood what Reynolds meant. If he stayed, he wouldn't just be choosing Lurva. He'd be leaving his people behind. The final decision. That night, James stood at the edge of the settlement, staring up at the twin moons overhead. Lurva found him again. This time, she didn't speak. She just stood beside him, silent. James finally exhaled. You knew this was coming, didn't you? She nodded. A long pause. Then finally, he made his decision. He turned to her, meeting her silver eyes. I'm staying. For the first time, he saw something in her expression break, a mixture of relief, disbelief, and something deeper, something real. She reached out, hesitated for half a second, then took his hand. Then you are truly one of us now. James squeezed her hand back. For the first time in days, he felt at peace. Tomorrow, the world would change. But tonight, he was exactly where he was meant to be, a human among aliens. The sun rose over Vashera 3, its golden light spilling across the mountains and painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. The colony was still recovering from the Zarkari attack, but today wasn't about war. Today was about something else entirely. James Carter had made his decision. He wasn't just an engineer anymore. He wasn't just a human outsider who had stumbled into an alien culture. He was staying. He had chosen Lurva, chosen the Vasheri way of life. And now he had to face what came next. The final trial. James stood before the great gathering hall, where the Vasheri held their most important ceremonies. The building was ancient, carved into the very cliffs of the planet, with massive stone pillars covered in glowing symbols. Inside, the elders, warriors, and noble families of the Vasheri waited. And at the center of it all stood Varzun, Lurva's father. The warlord watched James closely, his silver eyes filled with something unreadable. Respect, challenge, a test. James took a slow breath. This was it. He had proven his strength in battle. He had defeated the Khazar. He had proven his wisdom in diplomacy. He had faced down the Craxian leader. He had led warriors into war, helped defend the settlement, and stood his ground when others would have run. But one final trial remained, becoming truly one of them. The oath of the Vasheri. Varzun stepped forward, his deep voice booming through the chamber. James Carter, you have walked our path, fought beside our warriors, and honored our traditions. But words are not enough. If you wish to remain among us, if you truly wish to claim your place beside my daughter, then you must take the oath of the Vasheri. The room fell into a heavy silence. James felt the weight of 100 eyes on him. Lurva stood just behind her father, her silver gaze locked onto James. He knew what this meant. This wasn't just some ceremonial gesture. The oath of the Vasheri was binding. It meant he wasn't just an honored guest. He was one of them. Forever. James took a step forward, his heart hammering in his chest. Varzun raised his blade, the same energy-forged weapon that James had wielded in battle. The blade glowed with ancient power, pulsing like a living thing. "Kneel." James did. Varzun pressed the tip of the blade against James' shoulder, the heat of the energy hum tingling against his skin. "Speak the words." James swallowed hard. Then, slowly, he repeated the vow. "I am no longer just of Earth. I am of Vashura. I walk among the stars as one of the Vashiri." The watching crowd murmured, some with approval, others with shock. But James wasn't done. He met Varzun's gaze, then glanced at Lirva, who had never looked at him with more intensity than in this moment. And then he finished the vow. "My blade will stand beside yours. My word will be my honor. My heart will belong to only one." Lirva sucked in a sharp breath. Silence stretched through the chamber. Then Varzun smiled. It was the first genuine smile James had seen from the warlord. "Then rise, James Carter. You are Vashiri. A new beginning." The ceremony ended in celebration. Vashiri warriors clasped James' shoulders, some with pride, others with amusement. Even those who had once doubted him now seemed to accept his place among them. But it wasn't just them. Some humans from the colony, those who had fought beside him, came forward as well. Commander Reynolds, despite his earlier hesitation, gave James a nod of respect. "You earned this," he said simply, "even if I still think you're insane." James laughed. "Probably." Then, as the crowd began to disperse, James felt a soft touch on his arm. Lirva. She stood beside him, her expression unreadable. James felt his chest tighten. Was she happy? Nervous? Regretting this? Finally, after a long moment, she spoke. "You chose to stay." James nodded. "Yeah, I did." A slow smile spread across her face. And then, before he could even react, she grabbed him by the collar and kissed him. The crowd erupted into cheers. James barely had time to process it before she pulled back, her silver eyes shining. "Then from this day forward, you are mine." James chuckled, still breathless. "I think it's safe to say, I don't regret it. The future awaits." As the celebration continued, James found himself standing at the edge of the city, looking out at the stars. He had no idea what came next. Would humans and Vashiri truly coexist? Would the Zarkari return? Would he ever see Earth again? None of that mattered right now. For now he had a home, a new family, a new purpose, and most importantly, he had Lirva, a human among aliens, and he wouldn't have it any other way.